During his State of the Nation speech Thursday, Russian President Vladimir Putin described new strategic nuclear weapons that he claims can't be intercepted. Putin said the Russian technological breakthrough would render NATO's U.S.-led missile defense, quote, useless. David Martin has more.
To hear Putin tell it, the new nuclear weapons he unveiled are invincible. The U.S. has no defense against them. One is a nuclear-powered air-launched cruise missile with an unlimited range that allows it to maneuver around air defenses. To hear the Pentagon tell it, they are not the game changers Putin made them out to be.
We're not surprised by the statements, and the American people should rest assured that we are fully prepared.
Another weapon is a nuclear-armed underwater drone, which would be released by a submarine to attack a port or naval base. Putin said these new weapons are needed to counter U.S. efforts to build a defense against Russia's most formidable weapon, its nuclear-armed long-range ballistic missiles.
I'm holding altitude of the missile.
The U.S. has been installing missile defenses complete with interceptors in both Eastern Europe and Alaska. But Sandy Winnefeld, formerly the #2 officer in the U.S. military and now a consultant to CBS News, insists those are designed to defend against a much smaller attack from Iran or North Korea, not a barrage of Russian ballistic missiles.
This is a real dose of good old-fashioned Russian paranoia in terms of their concerns over our traditional ballistic missile defenses negating their nuclear deterrent.
You call it paranoia. We are building missile defenses, and the Pentagon just asked for money for 20 more interceptors.
We have told the Russians until we're blue in the face that this is not about them. To think that our missile defenses could defend against a massive Russian attack coming over the poles is ludicrous. And we've tried to explain this to the Russians, and they just won't hear it.
U.S. officials believe Putin unveiled these new weapons both to impress his domestic audience ahead of presidential elections and to lay down some bargaining chips for any future arms control negotiations. Elaine?
David Martin, thank you. Mark Jacobson is a professor at Georgetown University. He joins me now from Washington. Mark, Russia says these missiles are undetectable. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders responded to Putin's speech Thursday. Let's listen.
President Putin has confirmed what the United States government has known all along, which Russia has denied. Russia has been developing destabilizing weapons systems for over a decade in direct violations of its treaty obligations. President Trump understands the threats facing America and our allies in this century and is determined to protect our homeland and preserve peace through strength. U.S. defense capabilities are and will remain second to none.
Which nation is giving the more accurate characterization of how dangerous these missiles could be?
Well, it's a little bit of both. On the one hand, the nuclear threat that Russia poses to the United States hasn't changed much since the end of the Cold War. I think Sandy Winnefeld's exactly right, that our missile defense systems aren't designed to deal with them. But at the same time, what I think is more dangerous is what we see happening on the non-armed front. That is, that the Russians are not afraid of engaging us in political warfare, subversion, coercion, disinformation. I mean, you've been watching this for the last couple of years. And so this is merely the Russians trying to say, look, we're the victims and we have to defend ourselves against an aggressive America by putting together new nuclear weapons. But from a practical standpoint, there's no real change to the threat.
Well, do you expect a more significant reaction from the U.S. than the comments we heard on Thursday?
Well, that's the problem. I think that the White House hasn't done much at all since Trump took office in terms of countering either Russian political ambitions or Russian threats. In fact, it's almost incredulous to think that just a few weeks ago, or less than a few weeks ago, Russian troops, Russian mercenaries attacked U.S. forces in Syria. Yet there's been no real strong reaction from the White House or the Pentagon, for that matter.
Well, Putin emphasized that the development of these weapons was a response to the U.S. withdrawal from a Cold War-era treaty banning missile defenses. What is Russia's goal in developing and announcing the existence of these missiles?
I think we have to start to understand that Russia, that Putin in particular, has global ambitions. These global ambitions are very similar to the Cold War. It's Russian domination of the transatlantic sphere. In other words, the Russians want to dominate Europe, whether it's through coercion, intimidation, not necessarily occupation and military force, but they also want to be able to be dominant in the Middle East. They want to be seen as a world leader. This requires them saying, one, we have a stronger military than the United States, which simply isn't the case. Secondly, we can develop new nuclear weapons that can threaten you despite efforts at missile defenses. And three, and most importantly, we are going to continue to operate in terms of carrying out political warfare campaigns, interfering in your elections, getting into your media cycle, and you aren't going to do a thing about it. And what's worrying me is that the Russians aren't scared about any reaction they may see from the United States, precisely because we haven't done much in the last year and a half.
Finally, Mark, you've written about the similarities between current and Cold War Russian propaganda activities. Does this latest display by Russia factor into that?
Absolutely. I disagree with those who say we're not in a new Cold War. I think, in fact, if it wasn't clear before that the Russians were carrying out campaigns of subversion, disinformation, proxy wars, which is precisely what a Cold War is, then this bellicose statement by Putin today that's really reminiscent of the old Khrushchev, we will bury you type statements. We should make no mistake. We are there. We are in a new Cold War, and we're going to have to change the way we think about the Russians in a fundamental way.
Mark Jacobson, thanks so much.
My pleasure, Elaine.